MCP is just a protocol for how an agent speaks to a tool, but it doesn't solve all the problems. You're still left with an auth problem. Okta, Auth0, they're really focused on being the front door to the application. In agent lands, everything's a bit different, right? An agent can't just access your email just because it wants to. It needs to be able to prove that it's you and that you have authorized it to act on your behalf. That's just a different paradigm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of AI Without Borders. I'm thrilled to have Alex Salazar, founder of Arcade.dev, a platform aiming to solve one of the biggest challenges with agents, tool authentication. Arcade.dev recently came out of stealth with a $12 million raise. Alex also founded Stormpath, which was acquired by Okta, where he served as VP of new products. But most importantly for this podcast, Alex has strong roots in the Latin American culture. His family is from Colombia. He spent part of his childhood in Colombia, and he grew up in the Miami Latin community. Alex, welcome, and thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, man. Very excited.
So maybe starting from the beginning, I spoke with your sister, Vanessa, who I previously had in the podcast. Aside from saying that you're the funnier sibling, she mentioned you've always been passionate about technology, even back in your gaming days. Where do you think that passion from technology comes from?
Yeah. So I'm so happy you have my sister on here. She's awesome. Mom is very proud. So honestly, it came from mom. Our mom was the first, female computer scientist coming out of FIU in Miami. I think she may have been like the first female computer scientist, maybe all of Colombia, when she graduated. And so she had started, my mom was a serial entrepreneur, is a serial entrepreneur. And her first company was a computer distributor to LATAM. So, selling computers and printers and things like that. And so I'm going to date myself here but I was lucky because of what my mom did for a living. I had a computer in my bedroom at a really young age. In fact, I may have been, of all of my friends, I may have been the first one to have not just a computer in the house, but one in his own bedroom. And my mom, my mom was cool with me playing video games at a really young age. And so they obviously started off as like educational games, like math games, but it very quickly turned into all kinds of games. I'm an avid gamer, and that's really was the gateway drug into tech.
Are you still a gamer today?
I am actually. Taste in games has materially changed now that I have a startup and multiple kids. So I no longer will do, 12-hour marathon of an RPG, but my tastes have actually transitioned a bit more from like video games and more into board games. And when I build my own sample apps for AI agents, I actually build for myself, little RPG games. So.
Oh, that's fine. You should definitely put out some of those. And maybe going on that line of background, when were you first exposed to the world of AI?
I honestly, when I was in venture. So a little backstory. So as you mentioned earlier, I started my company Stormpath, which was an authentication company for developers. So login screens, password reset flows, all the APIs you needed for authentication and user identity. Very similar to Auth0. And we got acquired by Okta. And then as I was getting ready to leave Okta after I'd done my time there, when you get acquired, there's typically packages that keep you there for a number of years. At the end of that, I knew I wanted to start another company. But the problem was that cloud computing as a category felt like it was too mature. It was kind of over. I didn't see a lot of white space. So I didn't feel excited about starting a company in cloud again. So I went into venture. I got really lucky. A friend of mine, a guy named Kinta Kalori out of NEA, had just started a new fund called NeoTribe. And so I did a brief stint there. And when I got there, AI, everybody was talking about AI. And so I started to go spend time with a lot of AI founders. And at first, I wasn't terribly impressed with the state of AI. Everybody was building their own machine learning models, and it all just felt way too complicated for the average person or the average engineer to ever deliver anything. And I just happened to be, front row in venture when GPT 3.5 came out, and then ChatGPT, and then GPT 3.5 Turbo came out, which is the first function calling model. And when all that happened in short succession, That's when I got very excited. And that's when I realized, oh, this is going to be a new platform. People are going to be building applications off of these large language models. And once I saw tool calling, I could see the writing on the wall. People were going to extend it into talking to all kinds of services and really build workflow automation, not just chatbots.
Oh, that's great that you have both perspectives, investor, founder. And maybe for the people from the audience who don't have much context, can you share a little bit of what Arcade.dev does and what's the value proposition?
Yeah. So we make it easy to connect your AI, your large language model, your agent to other APIs, data, and systems. And we do that in three ways. The first one is we have out of the box connectors to a number of the very popular services like Gmail and Calendar and GitHub. The second piece is most people are ultimately going to need custom connectors, right? Think of, an agent talking to your own APIs, whether it's an internal application or an external application, but talking to your proprietary APIs, you're going to need an SDK. And so we provide a lot of functionality out of the box. So the developers, all they have to do is just wire a few things up. And then they have a very stable, secure, and more importantly, LLM friendly set of connections. And then the last thing we do, which is actually the backbone of the intellectual property, is auth for the agents and the tools. Because if you have an agent that you want to access your email, well, how's it going to authenticate into Gmail as you without some security kludge? And so we've done a lot of engineering work to make it possible for an agent to go access downstream systems very securely using the same security patterns that the enterprises are already used to using, so that we're not breaking anything for CISOs.
Related to that line of authentication, like why is it kind of agent tool authentication specifically so challenging? And why do you think that maybe the traditional authentication players won't be able to solve it?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a bunch of reasons. So why is it so hard? Well, the first thing is that no one had ever really contemplated agents in the traditional security posture. So if you think of the world pre-agents, you would go to some website, you'd maybe log in with Google, you'd go through the OAuth flow in your browser, get dropped back into the application, and then that application could interact with Google if it wanted to, but more often than not, you were really operating within the domain of that application. And most applications didn't really interact with outside third-party services. They really had most of their logic internal. Think of that like a Workday or Salesforce. The majority of the logic is internal. And so all the auth providers that existed, Stormpath, Okta, Auth0, name them, they're really focused on being the front door to the application, right? It's really about getting you into the app. In agent land, everything's a bit different. And so the first thing is that getting you into the agent, that's the easy part, right? Nobody's complaining about that. The authentication and authorization problem really comes in when the agent attempts to do something, when it tries to act. And that's when it tries to integrate to something else. That's when auth really matters, right? Is this a trusted agent? Can I trust this agent or is this some random agent? And the agent itself is going to have its own credentials, but then depending on what it's trying to do, many of the services that we need, like Gmail, it needs to know who the user is, right? An agent can't just access, your email just because it wants to. It needs to be able to prove that it's you and that you have authorized it to act on your behalf. And so that's just a different paradigm than what's existed before. The second problem is that the existing protocols, the existing paradigms are really designed for web applications where there's a browser involved and the users at the keyboard when it happens. Agents are not web apps. They might have a web front end, but all the agent logic is typically a tier beneath the web app at best. And if it's designed properly, the tool calling layer is a tier beneath the agent itself. And so there's just a lot of monkey patching that a typical developer would need to do in order to process a delegated auth flow properly. And so we make all that out of the box. So the developers don't have to know how to spell OAuth. We just handle it. the other piece as well is that agents, a lot of the value in an agent is its ability to go reach out and talk to other services. If you go look anywhere, what people trying to build with agents, almost all of it is reaching out to talk to other services. And so the set of integrations that an agent needs is quite broad, much broader than a typical web app. Uh, and so, simply having the user log in right up front and onboard and authorize everything like during the onboarding process, it doesn't really work out because the users will typically drop off if there's more than one or two like pre-auths. Like, when you say, oh, hey, here, click on your Google and give us access. If there's more than one or two of those, people won't go through it. And so we make all of that very, very simple.
No, that's amazing because yeah, we have one portfolio company which unfortunately started before Arcade.dev existed. Like agent authentication is not on their core, but they spent a bunch of months and resources, which now likely would have been solving in hours, if not less.
Yeah, it's really funny. We there's one great story. This one single developer by himself was at a hackathon for LangChain, I think, and happened to bump into someone from our organization. I think he bumped into my co-founder, and was like, "Oh, I've heard of you guys." And then he looked at the docs, and in the weekend, like in under 48 hours, he ended up building an agent, like a personal productivity
Mhm.
agent using us. And by the following Tuesday, he had a term sheet
Wow.
from a VC. It was crazy. So the big value that we give developers is honestly speed to market with advanced functionality without having to worry about how to secure it all. We just make it easy.
No, that's great. And related to the spaces, there's been a lot of activity, I would say, in the past maybe 4 months. Especially, there's a lot of talk now about MCP in the
Yeah.
context of agent tooling. Some people kind of believing or saying that it has solved basically all the challenges that people have integrating kind of agents to external tools. What things have you found out that MCP does not solve? And what is your overall opinion on MCP?
Yeah. Look, I'm a believer in MCP, but my God, has it moved fast? You know, I- Man, 3 weeks ago, it was a desktop protocol. And I think on Monday, they merged support for HTTP. And on Thursday, OpenAI adopted it. And so it's been a whirlwind. But what is MCP? MCP is just a protocol for how an agent speaks to a tool. And that's really it. It's very powerful. We're very excited, but it doesn't solve like all the problems. It's just now standardizing the communication between between the two services. You're still left with an auth problem, and if you go in the forums, that's what people are talking about. So that's been great. You still have to go figure out, what MCP tools you're going to build, how you're going to build them, and how you're going to run them and deploy them. Like all the problems are still there, except for the interface, the protocol between the agent and the tools. But the great news is it's brought a tremendous amount of awareness to the category. And so, it's really interesting. Up until about a month ago, a lot of people weren't even thinking about what they could build if they could connect an AI system to another service. And thanks to MCP, people started to see the art of the possible. And that's been awesome.
We've definitely seen that level of awareness increasing over time. One of the things I wanted to ask you is your first company, Stormpath, which was sold to Okta, as we mentioned, was sold also in the authentication space. You had a good outcome, maybe not the outcome that you may have expected. What did you learn from that first kind of founding experience, and especially what lessons do you draw in like building a true generational changing company?
Oh my gosh. A lot. So there are a bunch of things we got right. And so the first thing we got right was we got timing right. The market was really early. EC2 and S3 had just kind of kicked. And we saw the writing on the wall that developers were going to need a way of authenticating and authorizing users' login screens for their apps because the things that they used to use were no longer available, notably things like Active Directory. And so we just happened to catch that market at the right time. We also caught an enormous market, like the market that Auth0 and us created ended up being a bigger market than Okta's core market. I mean, Okta's now fully pivoted into this. They acquired us, and then they acquired Auth0. And now we didn't know it at the time, but that was awesome. We learned the importance of developer experience and developer adoption. And that was one of the things we got right. I mean, we had the best DevRel team, in the Valley outside of maybe Twilio. And so, things we could have gotten better. It maybe sold a little later. uh, but no, but that being said, I mean, look, I think we learned the importance of catching, of being open-minded and catching developer communities early. I think one of the things that we didn't fully appreciate at the time was how big JavaScript was going to get. And so we had come from the Java world. And so we thought the JVM was like everything. And Auth0 was JavaScript native. And so when JavaScript started to blow up, like they were front and center in that community, and we were playing catch up. And that ultimately was a growing problem as JavaScript became like arguably the dominant language in the community at that time. And then we got acquired, and then within the acquire, I mean, man, that was an incredible experience. Okta, when I was there, it was Okta was in their prime, and we were growing like crazy, and we were doing a lot of stuff right. And so one of the benefits of getting acquired by a company like Okta at that stage, where it was pre-IPO, and then we went all the way through to pretty significant growth post-IPO, you get to see a lot of things done right at scale. And you get to meet a lot of great people who know how to do a lot of the right things at scale. And that network was incredible. And that education was incredible. In particular, how they did sales. Okta was one of the best sales teams I'd ever met. And that's led to a great network of people, some of which have joined us. Half of Arcade are former Okta. And so we're really lucky, so one of the best sales reps I've ever met, sales leaders I've ever met, one of the best two of the best authentication engineers I've ever worked with, one of the best operators or marketers I've ever worked with. It's been great.
You touched on one very interesting point there about the importance of catching that developer community early. So definitely this new kind of generative AI wave is amazing, but the flip side to that is the level of competition is at unprecedented levels than before. I was speaking with Chip, who we have as mutuals, who have been like investing since the cloud, and he was sharing how like compared to before in any given space, you have 30, 50 players, for example, in observability. How do you think about capturing that developer top of mind piece and capturing and building those communities?
Yeah, look, it's a real problem. I think AI is moving so fast and it's so big that that every category in AI has, untold numbers of people trying to go after it. I try and ignore the competition. I really try very hard to keep, myself from looking at competitive products or looking at competitive marketing. I really try and keep my team from paying attention to competitors, because, startups don't kill startups. Like, our success or our failure, it's not going to be dependent on what someone else did or didn't do. It's going to be about what we do. And when I think about how any company, but especially how we are going to win in this market, we have to have real differentiated technology. It's very easy to stand up a website and just knock out a few things, through vibe coding on Cursor. And we saw this with the early agents out there, right? The early agents were just wrappers on ChatGPT, and those are very hard business models to defend. We focused very heavily on the intellectual property we were building. The bar for ourselves was always, it has to be black magic, right? Like, when I demo this to somebody, they've got to be like, holy shit, how'd you do that? And if we can't clear that bar, that's not the right place for us to be putting our engineering work. And that also has a clarifying effect of like, what is the business? And so when you put that much effort and that much focus on the core differentiating IP, it helps define and focus where the value of the product is and what the business is going to ultimately, at least you don't get distracted by all the noise from all this different competition that might pull you in this direction or that direction. The other piece as well is, you have to have, if you're focused on the developer business, you have to have great developer experience. Developers are very impatient. And if they sign up and they can't make sense of it, and the docs are wrong, and it took an hour to get anything working, they're not going to adopt. And so we continue to invest heavily in developer experience. It's ultimately our core competency. Uh, half the team has done some degree of developer experience work, and Stormpath had exceptional developer experience that we carried over into Okta. And then the last piece is, you've got to make noise, right? You've got to make sure you're talking to the right people at the right altitude about the right problem. And that's an iterative problem. And that's an iterative statement. The conversations we were having with people 3 months ago have materially changed from the ones we're having today because the industry is moving so fast. And so we've had to keep our running shoes on and be very, very agile in how we're talking about the problem statement.
Related to that point on the space moving so fast, how does that shape your go-to-market strategy, especially again, agents, a market that will likely be very massive from what I think we both believe in, but still growing in terms of not many companies have agents in production. So how does that shape how you approach go-to-market? Which customers to focus your attention on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, let me separate out that our go-to-market has two different pieces to it. And so when we think about our developer product-led bottoms up go-to-market motion, it's anyone building an agent. If you're a developer and you're trying to build an agent, we don't care where you work, we don't care where you live, we don't care what your skill level is. We want you to be successful, and we want to help you get your agent into production to the degree that we can influence the outcome of you getting into production. There's many other things you have to go deal with that have nothing to do with us, but we're going to try and make sure that when it comes to the tool calling and the agent auth, that piece is just easy and taken care of, and you can go focus elsewhere. But then the other part of our go-to-market is the work we do directly with customers, the sales work. And where we focus our sales efforts is in the people that we believe are going to go to production. How many engineers do they have? How many engineers are currently tasked on this project? Is the scope of the agent they want to build properly sized? Are they trying to chew off too much, or are they trying to focus, on something that's achievable? Do they have the right timelines? Basic sales qualification stuff. And it tends to be, companies that are, the lower end of we will call mid-market or SMB, all the way up to the lower end of enterprise.
No, that makes sense. And yeah, as a user of Arcade, I can validate especially on the first front, how easy you make that experience.
Yeah, we've seen your traffic. It's exceptional.
Yeah. Funny anecdote to share at another time. Related to this point on the market evolving, so 2025 was highlighted as the year of agents. But as we've spoken and as we speak with several enterprises, the reality is that the majority are not yet with agent cases in production. For the customers that are in production and are using Arcade, like what are some of the use cases that you find most interesting? And are there some commonalities across those companies who are actually going to production?
Oh man, there's so much to say there. So we see a wide variety, but there are some patterns that are emerging. And so the first thing is that people define agents in really funny ways. And so we've seen a lot of stuff that people call agents that aren't really agents. And so let me define what I see as an agent. To me, an agent is an application where the large language model is deciding what to do next and how. And that's notably different from a traditional piece of software where deterministic code, the developer,
Yep.
is deciding what happens when and how. And a large language model might be involved in that as a step to generate text or classify some information. But that's very different than the large language model itself making decisions on what to do in the workflow. So that's how, and then with that definition, part of that workflow that the agent is deciding on ultimately is calling a tool. It's interacting with the outside world to retrieve information or more increasingly take action. So with that, you're right. We haven't seen a ton of people yet in production with true agents. We see a lot of people in production with what they call an agent, but it's really just a simple RAG use case, like chatbots for support, where it's regurgitating, public knowledge-based information that was just ingested earlier than the user session. But we see the number one use case we see right now is really go-to-market use cases. People trying to do social media, which I think you might also be in that camp with the agent you're building, right? People trying to do sales use cases, people trying to interact with their messaging systems like Gmail and Slack and Discord. which is not what we expected, which is always fun to be surprised. And then the other use case we see, which overlaps, is people are trying to get an agent to interact with their existing system, with their existing software, externally facing software. So they're trying to offer up a different interface. It might be as simple as a chatbot, but the chatbot controls the application that they already have. So the integrations aren't so much things like Gmail and Slack. The integrations are custom API endpoints for their app. And so Arcade is used to wrap up those APIs, contextualize them to the large language model, and then handle all the auth and integration and interactions. And then from there, we see, we're seeing an explosion of variety in the people we're starting to talk to. Agents for travel companies, travel-oriented companies like airlines and hotels. We're starting to see people thinking about commerce and agent. That's really early, but super exciting. We're seeing obviously developer tools. Everybody wants to have an agent, code for them and, manage all the pull requests, things like that. So it's really cool. We're seeing a lot of stuff, but that's what we're seeing in there. Like the earlier stage ends up being more custom UIs for applications and a lot more productivity and messaging systems.
It's going to be interesting what the answer is in a year when everything changes as it does in this space. But one of the things you touched earlier was how you don't focus on competition, like you focus on yourselves. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is the great thing now with generative AI is twofold. One, with the whole AI coding assistance, you can build like much more than you could before. And second, this being a relatively new space, a greenfield where there are so many different things to build.
Yeah.
One of the big challenges is how do you focus in this world and in this context, deciding like where you put your energy and attention in a world where in many ways you can do everything or slightly more. How do you think about focus and where to really put your resources?
Yeah, no, man, what an incredible question. I love vibe coding, right? I vibe code myself. All my sample labs are vibe coded. And I think that's really, illuminated the problems with vibe coding. And the first one is what you mentioned, right? It creates ADHD. When it feels that easy to write software, you start to write a lot more software. The problem is that if you run the risk of spreading yourself too thin, right? Like all that software has to be maintained, has to be checked, has to go through peer review. It has to have tests. And so you really run the risk of introducing bloat to the service. And so, we are constantly checking in with ourselves on, hey, what's the highest priority right now? Let's go focus on the highest priority as opposed to, hey, let's go build 9 things at once. That's, in my opinion, that's how startups die. And especially in the space of AI, like you've got to be great at one thing. There's too much competition. Everything's moving way too fast. And if you're trying to do 37 things at once, you're going to get smoked by a much more focused team. The second thing about vibe coding is that, as actually with all generative AI, everybody's always surprised and blown away, by generative AI. Oh, look at this email it wrote for me. Oh, look at this code it wrote for me. I can't believe it did it. Here's the thing. It's only as good as you because you're the human in the loop. Yeah. Right? When you're blown away by that email, it's because it hit what you define as a good email, right? When you're surprised by what it could code, it's because you're the one determining if that code's any good. And these models are very, very focused on making you happy. And so if you get a shitty developer vibe coding, you're going to get shitty code. And if you get an exceptional developer vibe coding, you're going to get exceptional code. And so the need for high quality engineering talent, I think today is just as important, if not more important now because of all of the AI based coding.
No, I loved that example. Maybe related to some notes that you previously made. So you, as you mentioned earlier, you had a stint on the investor side, on investor front. What would you say is kind of the biggest learning or lesson from that investor experience into how you're approaching and building our Arcade?
Yeah, a lot of it was like, a lot validation of a lot of things I already believed, but to an extreme point. Like they were as a founder, there's these hunches you feel, right? I really wish I had more of a competitive advantage, that my technology was deeper or that, or I'm winning because I have a great team. There's other things you start to, intuit that really matter. And then when and so when I went into venture, when you're seeing 2 companies a day, every single day, and then you have a few years to see the longitudinal outcome of all of those things that you saw, it really trains you quickly on what matters. And so my focus on having really powerful technology differentiated on the engineering itself was born directly out of my time in venture. I don't know that I would have been as dogmatic on it had I not been in venture. I would have been like, I would have just built something and it would have been cool and be like, let's go. Right. But because of my time in VC, when Sam and I started this, every time we built something cool, I was like, yeah, but is it black magic? Because if it's not black magic, it's not fucking worth it. And so we kept a very high bar on that. Similarly, we kept a really high bar on what I call what Neotribe Kitsu, the person I used to work with, called the market tug. If we weren't feeling like with Stormpath, we lucked into the right market. You know, we didn't do any user research. We ourselves were the users. Like we just built what we thought mattered, and then we just got lucky. That doesn't work very well very often. And so with this one, we flipped it all. We flipped it around. You know, we didn't actually write any code for the first few months. Everybody who saw an early demo of what we were originally building saw fake, vaporware. It was, Figmas and PowerPoint slides. Sam was losing his mind because I wouldn't let him build product code. And so but we just kept iterating and iterating until we started to feel people yank the product out of our hands. They're like, oh, I need that. Or, until they're blown away by something. And that took 6 months of iteration to get there. And that was purely born out of my time at venture, where it really beat in my head. It's no. The people have to be desperate for whatever it is you're trying to build.
Related to this line of venture and investors, thankfully at Flybridge, we were able to partner with Arcade, but I know that you had a very competitive round where you had to say no to a lot of VCs. Having been, again, an investor before, what do you look for a VC, especially in your context that you're a second-time founder,
Yeah.
like very well connected?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you're going to talk about this a little bit. So, this can be a little controversial, but I don't like most VC. And having worked in VC didn't help. And so maybe the first question is like, why? Right? A lot of it comes down to authenticity. The venture community, for a variety of reasons, has created a scenario where a lot of investors, are trying to fake it till they make it. And that comes with a lot of inauthenticity, which I find really difficult to deal with. Now, thankfully, there are incredible people in venture. And so I look for that, people who, as Kitsukulor and Neotribe put it, authentically vulnerable, right? They're going to think through the problem with me. They're not going to pretend they have the answer. That problem compounds because once you're really working on a hard problem, you're going to be looking for someone to talk to. And it's a very lonely journey as a founder. You can't always talk to your employees because you might freak them out. And so one of the easiest people to go talk to are your investors, because they're on the board and they're, they're financially incented. And so having someone who can provide advice, but not tell you what to do, is a very thin line. It's very, very hard line to drive. I actually struggle with this myself in VC, of not telling the founder what to do. But the few VCs that can really truly just be like an advisor and help you think through it and not pretend they know the answer, because there's no way they can, because they don't have the context of the day-to-day operations. Those people are magical. And the third thing that I look for is, I want someone who's seen success, because they're going to have access to playbooks. They're going to have their own experiences to draw from. They're going to have networks of people that they can bring to bear. And you pull all this together and you have an incredible VC who can really, truly help move the needle on the business. And then, of course, you look for somebody you like. And so when we were making a decision on how we were going to construct this financing round, look, I picked my favorite people. Chip Hazard at Flybridge, Peter Sonsini from formerly at NEA, now at Laud. Those were my two seed investors at Stormpath. I love those guys. And then we were incredibly lucky to pick up Mike Volpe, who had just left Index to go start Hanabi. And that's an incredible round.
Now that's an incredible roster. To close off the section, as we spoke at the beginning, you have some of your LATAM roots, and wanted to ask if you have some perspectives on the whole tech ecosystem in Latin America, especially now with generative AI.
I'm from Miami, born and raised in Miami, and spent a lot of my time in Colombia. And so to me, I extend Miami to include Latin America, right? Miami is the capital of Latin America, in my opinion. But I think the challenge in Latin America, and this is pretty much, I think, almost anywhere, honestly, outside of Silicon Valley and, maybe New York and maybe Boston, is it's really dependent on the density of engineering talent. We just talked about vibe coding, right? If you don't have high quality engineering talent that knows how to build product, which is a really important distinction, right? There are really great engineers everywhere. And, you might argue that there's a lot of, engineering density in one or two cities. But the question is, how many of them are product engineers versus IT engineers, right? Building products for people versus, just, internal workflow automation. There needs to be a high enough density of high quality product engineers, I think, in order for the probability that great companies are going to come out of any particular city in LATAM. I think that is improving greatly. I think there are some cities that are starting to have some of that density. Clearly, Argentina has done a really good job, or is doing a pretty good job. Or Auth0, in part, was born out of Argentina, but also Seattle and Microsoft. So I think that's a major challenge. And so I can imagine that there would be companies in LATAM that will be very successful in tech with Gen AI. But until there's a bit more talent density, I suspect those products will really be focused internally within LATAM, like Rappi, right? And Mercado Libre. I think once you start to get a bit more density of high caliber product engineers, then I think LATAM might, birth a global company or an infrastructure company for the next wave. But I do think it starts with talent density in the major cities, which I haven't yet seen. Now, we ourselves have a LATAM team, and we continue to invest heavily in a LATAM team. Right now, most of the talent we've picked up has been from Brazil, but our LATAM teams are remote, so we are agnostic. I would love to find people in Colombia. And so it's a journey.
Hopefully we can make that happen.
I hope so too.
For the last section, I wanted to ask you a quick fire round. So 4 quick short questions, and you give me your quick reactions. The first one is, which public company would you buy, and which public company would you sell, and why?
Ooh, I really like what Cloudflare's doing. I think Cloudflare is one of the few cloud native companies that I think is advantaged and not threatened by AI and the AI wave. Similarly, I would probably not buy any of the traditional cloud computing vendors, I think, at the infrastructure level.
Yeah.
I think, many of them are saying things that about AI, that they're going to be AI native and they're going to go AI. But, history has not been kind to companies trying to transition from one technology wave to another. And so if you think of all the companies that you can name in the tech sector, with the exception of Microsoft, almost all of them were started after 2000 or just 4. And before that, in the client server wave, there was a ton of companies, IBM and HP and Compaq and, TIBCO, but most people just forgot all those companies' names. They've all kind of gone away with the change of the guard. And I think the same thing's going to happen again in AI. I'm betting on it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yeah, I remember a year and a half or 2 years that when ChatGPT came out, a big majority of the market was thinking incumbents will own everything, and it's a done game. I think perspectives have changed a lot.
Just look at Google. Look at Google, right? They unassailable, the best business model in history. And in the span of 24 months, they're fighting for their lives. And we'll see what happens. But that's disruption. Happens every cycle.
Some interesting years. What's something you initially got wrong about generative AI that you've changed your mind in the last 12 months?
That's a hard one. So this is a fun one, because we were really bullish, and then we weren't bullish enough. We made a really good bet early on to not build technology for where the state of AI was at that moment. It was a very scary, high risk bet we made. We were like, no. We got to build for 24 months from now. And so if we play back, like, where are we going to be in 24 months? And then let's build for that. We undershot it. Everything accelerated so much faster than we thought. And so the, again, it's a nuanced one, but the pace of innovation in AI has been so much faster than even we, who were very bullish on AI, estimated.
Yeah, the speed of this phase is definitely been incredible. And the last one is I've heard you have amazing leadership skills, both as you are your company as a CEO, but also in your family. What's the best advice you give to founders on how to be a good leader?
Oh my God. Okay. So, I'll try and condense it, and because it's probably a podcast onto itself. Honestly, it starts and ends with who you hire and who you fire. When I was early in venture and I was trying to pick founders, I'd ask them if they'd already fired somebody. It's a controversial answer, right? Nobody wants to talk about that. But the best founders I know are really quick to fire, because you have to be. Like, nobody's gonna be hiring 100%. Every hire is going to be rock star. It doesn't happen. At best, you're 60% at best, maybe less. And so if you want a team of rock stars, of really high talented, like high commitment people who just get shit done, you've got to make sure that, like, you're pruning. And if you're hiring exceptional talent and filtering to keep the density of that talent really high, things get very magical. And then the thing that has to happen in combo to that is you have to be really good about goal setting. Be very, very clear on, like, where is north? What are we shooting for? And in the early stages, that's really hard because the north changes on a weekly basis. And so you've got to, this is a more art than science, is how do you keep everybody focused and rowing in the same direction when everything's changing so quickly? And your own goals are different week to week. How do you avoid whiplash? But that's why founders make the big bucks or the small bucks,
Yeah,
depending on the stage.
gonna be stealing that firing question, but no, Alex, I highly appreciate the time. I've enjoyed a lot the conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining.